you for being here. And I'm actually very excited about this panel because, as some of you might know, I'm very much into farming. I come from the permaculture field. And I have to admit, coming from the environmental sector and then permaculture, old school, small scale farming, where everything is very natural, of course, the word food tech kind of, I stop breathing for a second and then I look what direction does it go at. So I feel like it's a huge field which can go in all directions. And the question today is, will it save us in the future and will it save the world? And I think to start off, I'd love to have all of you just talk a little bit about what food tech actually means in your field of expertise and what part of food tech is the field you're dealing with on a daily basis. I'd love to, let's do ladies first, sorry.
Okay.
We'll do the charming ladies first.
All right. Well, thank you so much for asking a very pertinent question first. For me, food tech does not exist without ag tech. So when I speak about food tech, I always, in the back of my mind, include ag tech. And so when we talk about food tech and ag tech, I also think about food is not negotiable. In life, there are lots of things that we can compromise, negotiate. Food is not negotiable. Nobody should go hungry. And Bernhard would be the first one to say this. But so when I think about it, because it's a continuum of agriculture to food, so I want to make a definition to help the audience follow me when I talk about other things. We talk about upstream, which means the farm tech, things that would happen on the farm, supply chain, biotech. These are upstream.
Upstream, okay.
When I talk about food tech, I specifically mean it's consumer facing. It could be alternative proteins. It could be grocery delivery. It could be restaurant automation and robotics. Anything that is consumer facing to me includes the food tech, CPGs and all of that.
Well, from my side, and people might wonder, like World Food Program, why do you talk about food or ag tech, right? You may know us from wherever the UN is delivering food, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Venezuela. It's the World Food Program. So we do that, like we provide food to people who are in need, like in dire need, and otherwise they cannot survive. But we actually also work on sustainably ending hunger. And this is where like the topic of food tech and ag tech that Jaleh was just describing is actually really exciting for us. We're talking about the future. What can we possibly do? Like, will food tech save us? Maybe it will not be the one single solution, but it can actually make a difference in the journey towards zero hunger. And right now, there's 828 million hungry people on the planet, and 500 to 600 million of those people are smallholder farmers. So if you think about that, we should do something because they are farming every day, but they cannot actually live a healthy life because they're just too poor still. So like this is where I think there's lots of opportunity for technology, either on-farm information, but also like how can you create market access so that you actually get the price that your hard work you put into in a daily basis, that you actually get rewarded for that.
Yeah, for me as a biotechnologist, it's certainly the process itself, using cells and maybe even cell-free systems to convert residues from a farm into something we can eat. Yeah, may that be a palm oil equivalent that's made of yeast oil, or just alternative proteins from algae. Yeah, all of these processes can be realized using waste streams that have no value right now on your farm, but right on your farm with technology that is affordable and doable right now. Yeah, and we're producing products that are drop-in. They're the same as those that you know already from your farm. Yeah? So there's an added value to the farmer, and it provides resilience towards changes that you encounter through climate variations. It's also an opportunity for us to bring those technologies over to lower income countries, developing countries, to make that step over to sustainable farming and to make them realize we can actually do something in climate change that is having a positive impact on the climate itself.
And also maybe giving them that step up so that they don't have to go through the entire processes that we've already gone through.
Correct.
I think it's really interesting, Daie. You invest in these things, and you were telling me before how investments are actually changing. You just explained to us upstream, downstream, and you actually gave me a lot of hope in our talk before. Could you just tell the audience what you were telling me? Where is the money going in the food tech sector?
Well, so let me give you the context first for the audience. You already heard it, so forgive me for repeating myself. The context is going back to 2022, before the stock market crash, the total global investment in all the way from farm tech to downstream food tech was $52 billion all over the world. In the quarter that we just finished, Q1 2023, the numbers that came out, if you project it to annual, that $52 billion is now 24, 25, estimated to be almost half.
That's not what gave me hope.
Yeah, that's not where the hope is. But, I mean, this is the headline when you read. You have to go a little bit further down, dive down into the data, then they say, there is good news here. And the good news from my perspective is that what happened, that $52 billion, the peak, was mostly going to downstream food tech, alternative proteins, for example. Took huge chunks. Like one deal was $800 million. It's just crazy. So now, when you look at projection for 23, you see that the drop in food tech is 40%, nearing 50%. But when you look at it, the upstream ag tech, robotics, autonomous whatevers, that dropped only 8%. To me, that's the good news. Because that means if we improve the efficiency in food production, the food security and hunger and nutrition would be supplemented.
No, maybe just to add to this, like, why are we even talking about food tech? I mean, we're at GreenTech Festival. It's like, this is what a lot of times, like, I get asked it all the time, like, why do you do this? Like, it's like, a third of global man-made greenhouse gases are from the food system, so from farm to what lands on our table. So that's a third of all greenhouse gases. So if we don't tackle that 1/3 of greenhouse gases, of course you need to talk about this. And this is also why, like, that investment that you're talking about, I think that's really exciting to actually still see that there's investments, but there's also great minds and like startup founders, maybe here in the audience, that also work on these types of solutions, right?
Are there any of you in the audience? I'd actually love to see that. Can we have a raise of hands? Are there any startups who are working in the food tech? Yay! 2, 3, perfect. 4, 5.
Couple of back there, so
Yep.
yeah, very good.
But this is another good news. A lot of non-traditional food and ag people are in the audience. Thank you.
Perfect. I think next to translation, it is also looking at the effects of these new technologies. What can they offer? I think in the context of changing environments, we have to look at land use efficiency. That is certainly an issue in African countries, but elsewhere as well. With biotech, we can change this. We can make, for example, yeast oil on 1 hectare fermentation replaces 80,000 hectares conventional palm oil monoculture. Imagine the impact on the CO2 footprint of these products. Yeah? Significant. Land use efficiency is one thing. The other thing is using CO2 directly, for example, with cell-free systems where you just put enzymes together from nature that convert CO2 directly into an amino acid. Yeah? And that's a supplement for starving people, yeah? Providing essential nutrients. It's not only about food taste, it's also about nutrient density, particularly
Exactly.
in starving countries.
Food security is, nutrition security is just as important as food security. But while we are on the subject, I want to also bring another statistics that may be of interest. And that is, I forgot my thought. So I'll come back to it.
Well, I actually, because you just said nutrient deficiency, but I do think like a huge part, especially in an agricultural country like Germany, is how can we make the agricultural revolution work? You know, how can we actually help our farmers? How can we build a sustainable relationship for the farmers we have, which are not doing very well? So we have to support the little farms and the farmers we have and get it to a working system where we have a circular economy going on so that we can actually feed our own people. We can have a more localized chain, like that everything is becoming localized in countries again. I think it's something of the last year that we've learned through the Ukraine, how dangerous it is to outsource and to specify that, you know, one person only does carrots or only does this, and then the second you have the supply chain breakdown, you have this huge mess because nobody can work with each other anymore. So is Foodtech something you see on a small scale across the world in different countries that helps build up or secure the infrastructure of small farmers and sustainable farming that we have? Is that also something you...
I think it's a very important part of sustainable agriculture is to empower small farmers. Decentralizing, regionalizing your food production provides more reliant supply chains for the end consumer, but also might have the opportunity for improved quality. Yeah? So nutrient density is certainly key here. And circularity is your keyword about everything you said just now. We need to find routes to empower farmers to use their unused waste streams, valorize them, and preferentially valorize them in a food product, yeah? So that they stay in their market realm that they know. Yeah? You can't have a farmer necessarily produce energy, as has been done with biogas, because it's not what they know. If you use that bioenergy for your production process in your encased system, then that's a different matter. Yeah? And it's more easy to stay on control as well.
I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's also where it's a big problem, but where there's a problem, there's also like an opportunity, right? When you're talking about like why is there hunger, why do we have problems with like why do farmers in Germany or globally in developing countries have problems? It's like right now, depending on the country, between 30 and 40% of the food gets lost. Right, so it's like food waste. Typically in Germany, it would be like, well, in restaurants, what we throw away in our homes, in supermarkets, and like all of that. In developing countries, it might be up to 50% of the food that never enters the supply chain. So like it actually, like because they don't have the right storage and so on.
Yeah,
but then as well, a lot of this, like where we talk about opportunity, like some of the startups, we actually have a couple of our portfolio startups here today. Like when it's really exciting about like tackling the food waste problem, right? So essentially a solar-based food dryer that actually then, you know, you can have an income instead of throwing away and losing that income. Or blockchain-based insurance solution, or you know, giving credit to smallholder farmers because they couldn't afford like seeds, fertilizers, or anything more. Like these are the types of solutions where how do we get people who are currently unable to afford these types of things into a situation where they can provide for themselves and their families. And it's possible. And I think this is what's exciting for me, where, you know, it's not just about talking about like, well, we think, we hope. It's possible, and we can show it right now.
Yeah, I always like to take the bigger view. What happened, you know, this regional production of food has become far more important than it was 2 years ago. When the pandemic happened, everything was appended, including the supply chains, and we all know the stories. So the geopolitical realities of today, with the deterioration of China and its allies on one side and the Western world on the other side, I think the developing countries like the Western countries that we are in are beginning to say, okay, we're going to reduce our dependence on the world. It's not just food and agriculture, by the way. We are even moving chip manufacturing to our own countries. So reshoring, nearshoring, regional production of all sorts are very important. And when a pivot like this happens, it doesn't happen for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's a 20-year cycle we are in, reshoring and nearshoring. And so, to me, it's good news from a farmer's perspective, because that means my market is now stronger. I have a demand right here that wants my product. So it's good for the small farmers.
Do you think that a lot of the policies are actually helping, or are they discouraging new technologies? And especially because, at least here in Germany, it's heavily subsidized, and I do think that it subsidizes often in old infrastructures, and we're not really going to the new infrastructures, and we're not really getting new ideas into the system. And unfortunately, the old system doesn't really work. So it's kind of like an ironic twist of fate that you're pushing for a direction that we already know isn't working, and we're not getting the curve. What would you hope for in policies and regulations? What do you think is essential for protecting new technologies, that they have a positive and a sustainable spin on the agricultural sectors and providing food for the world?
Certainly, translation into the market is a big issue, particularly here in Europe. It's a different situation elsewhere, but in Europe it's certainly how to get venture capital to bring an idea to the market, and it's also the funding mechanisms are very complex and leave gaps for scaling innovation. That needs to change. And the second barrier that we have is certainly regulatory. There's one legislation on novel food. Many of the new technologies fall under this novel food regulation, and that usually is a very long, drawn-out and expensive process to get a new food product regulated. And I do see that, especially in the startup scene, there is startups that have very good ideas, ready products that could go to market, but they can't actually be sold here in Europe, because of this regulatory barrier. They go elsewhere. We're losing actually innovation through this pipeline.
Though on the other hand, you could say that this also protects us in a lot of ways.
It protects us. I think we should not compromise on food security. We need to change the pipeline and how the regulatory affairs are going to be conducted. And also the funding regulations to get people to actually pay for these regulatory affairs that are rather complex. When you're an innovator, you're certainly not an expert on regulatory legislation, and you need outside help or outside institutions to guide you through it. And normally, you don't have these tools ready at hand, and that's really a barrier to bring new technologies on the market.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because I think there is an aspect of regulation on new food products. A couple of other things were, particularly in Europe, I think there is room for improvement regulatory-wise compared to the US and other countries. That's one aspect. I do think, from looking again, whether it's subsidies or not, I'd rather look at the innovation ecosystem, startups, founders, and all of that. And I think this is where we, for instance, World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, we are based in Munich in Germany, also thanks to the German federal government, so it's BMZ, the Foreign Office, and also Bavaria, that have given us the first funding to actually kickstart our work. And by now, but this is an example of, we need a lot more of that, right? When you think about, how do you make this step change work? If we think about a future that can get us towards, we see that there's food for everybody is healthy, no child goes to bed hungry, in that future that we envisage, right? What needs to happen? We need startup founders. So like, if anybody here in the room is excited about this, like, you need the greatest minds to actually tackle some of those issues. I think that's one of the ingredients. Second one, you need investors or investor money. That has to come from somewhere. And then you talk about ecosystems. Again, like, there's a reason why, okay, we're based in Munich now, you're based in the Bay Area, so like there's reasons for these things to happen, why that actually is. But there's so much more room to grow. There's so many opportunities in the list. I mean, we could go on about stuff that could make a real difference, is a business model, and you have sustainably made a big impact on the planet, on stuff like hunger and also climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you live in a capitalistic society like we do, at the end of the day, profit motive is the most important outcome and thing that makes us do things. So regulations matter. So when you look at regulations that are hindering enough food production, some of it, I know in Germany, you are very sensitive to that, GMO and gene editing. But in the US, those issues are no longer issues for us. And what baffles me, I mean, I get it for Germans and French, I get it. But what baffles me, I go to Africa and I see adamant opposition to GMO. And I say to them, do you know that this food you're getting from UN, World Food Program, is 80% GMO?
Can be GMO, but it's not all of it.
Yes, but that goes into a huge discussion. But I mean, you are taking away, because GMOs, you as a small-scale farmer, you always have to buy the seed. So you're taking away a huge part of their individual. They can't farm without buying again. So,
but given the same thing, if farmers in the U.S. are making a profit, I guarantee you any other farmer would make a profit too.
Well, but you have examples but this is a whole India or something where you have examples of the exact opposite. But I think it's very interesting, Jaleh, because you've been once around the world, I feel like, and I've rarely talked with somebody who's had so much experience in so many different angles of this topic and who's seen it all, kind of thing. So
she is politely putting me in my age category.
No, not at all. I am very much in awe of all the things you've done. It's if you want to impress yourself, then please read your bio. It's mind-boggling. I don't really understand how one can do that in 2 lifetimes. It's incredible what you've managed to do. What are your hopes and what are your aspirations for Foodtech? Where do you think we have to go to make the future a better place and to defeat hunger, to become more sustainable? I'm still very much on the focus of how can we make this into a sustainable thing, not only on a money basics, but how can we make it sustainable for the environment we live in while feeding more and more people all around the world. So how can we get to that positive outcome of having a more sustainable agriculture and feeding the world?
To distill it in a couple of words or 3 words, no one should go hungry. I deeply believe in the commitment of World Food Program to making sure people have affordable, nutritious food. And that's the reason I'm going to be spending my sabbatical with Bernhard and his team in Munich. So having said that, I still think without doing much for agriculture, upstream, real farm work and biotech and supply chain, you can't achieve the goals of World Food Program easily. So, and I would tell you some examples of the kind of investments we are making. I'll give you 2 examples that give an example of the future I want to see. Mm-hmm. One is a robotic company that reduces the input for pesticides and fertilizer. What it does, you put a piece of equipment in front of the tractor. It's called Verdant Robotics, the company name. And it goes through the field, identify weeds, and squirts zaps them with a laser, no chemical. And then it identifies the real plant. Let's say it's a tomato plant or a pepper. Then it squirts a little bit of fertilizer right at the root. So that's the kind of future I want to see. The other example, we just invested in a company that is Australian company, by the way, and they use seaweed products to reduce methane production by cows by 90%. So this is the kind of world I want to see. And I don't think we can achieve real food security and nutrition security without these kind of technologies upstream.
Well, and there's a huge possibility, especially with this robotics. I talked to them actually because I was saying, couldn't you, enlarge your AI and put positive weeds in there, or that it doesn't attack the insect and doesn't use any pesticides, but then you can actually keep some flowering, some that don't harm the plant, and some insects.
Yeah.
And you could, and I think that's a huge topic, that there's these technologies out there which have a huge potential, but you actually, or I'm really hoping that the inventors and also the governments and the people using them do see that it's not only to actually gain more production in the food sector, but it can also help to diversify ecosystems, and that we actually take that one extra step, which might not bring you, more revenue, but which will actually have a long-lasting effect on the sustainability of the farming communities we live in.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's an aspect there, thinking about the future and what would my wish be, is like, even for the audience here, is like, sometimes these problems seem to be big and like we can't actually solve it, but like it's the same when we talk about climate change, the same about like a future where food tech, ag tech, like, just take one step. I mean, like everybody here in this room can say, well, I'm trying to throw away half a yogurt less, or I am trying to, do something to tackle food waste, or I'm trying to do something where I can make a difference by maybe I eat one time not meat but something else that's also tasty. Like, not to forbid anything, but like saying, okay, what each and every one of us can actually make a change. Now, talking about like the farmers, there's lots of exciting things that can happen, and like this is what really I want to say, like the opportunities to actually show that you can make a difference right now, and you can even like make a profit doing that. I think there's so many opportunities out there that is amazing for me. Like, and I don't know. I don't want to go into all this startups and innovation that we've supported, but like our portfolio of innovations by the end of last year has positively impacted about 37 million people. So doubling the number of people reached every year, like a little bit like in the startup sector, it's not yet growing like, like some of the, unicorn startups, but that gives me hope. That gives me hope that, with more support and great startup founders, we can actually really make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me is technology openness. I think not one technology will save our food base. It is the mixture of those and the integrative use of technology. Not biotech alone, but also energy production, AI use, digitalization, robotics. All of that needs to be thought out in a systematic manner. And we have to rethink and rebuild agriculture as promoting biodiversity and protecting it. Yeah? Right now, that's just the opposite. So it's a rethinking in the agricultural sector per se. Yeah? So for example, do we really need to do killing of insects? Yeah? Can't we rethink and say, let's repel them? They're still in the ecosystem. They might have a role somewhere else, but you don't want it on your plant at that point of time where it's fruiting. Yeah? All that is possible today. We just have to do it. And that's really the message. We have to do it now. And it's going to cost money.
And you have to overcome your fears, because I think even if it's the small scale or little farmer, you have to see what is out there that suits me, and to find somebody who helps you to find an investment, or to get to get your foot in and to figure out what technology can help me, what startup can I set up with a farmer that we can actually have a lasting change that's going to happen in the right direction. Thank you very much.
And if anybody wants to support fighting hunger, download the Share the Meal app. So 70 cents feeds a child for a day, just do it. So
that was the infomercial.
The infomercial is very important. Thank you
Indeed.
very much for being here. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. I would have actually loved to continue talking to you. I hope there was some interesting facts for you, and I hope that this discussion gave you something. I learned a lot, so thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for being here.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.